In my church growing up, we celebrated 3 main holidays. Now, I grew up in Assemblies of God church, so by no means were we a liturgical church. But even still, we divided the year into 3 major seasons with some downtime in between. The seasons were Christmas, Easter, and Vacation Bible School. And I call them seasons because while they may have been one-time events, each one was a production that took weeks of planning, preparation, and a lot of practice. It took time to learn all the speaking parts and solos for the Christmas program. It took time to save up enough toilet paper rolls and milk jugs or whatever else we needed for Vacation Bible School crafts. And it took time to outfit an entire Easter cantata cast in homemade bedsheet Bible costumes. Good things take a lot of time. And in liturgical time, there are similar seasons of preparation and of practice. These seasons enable us to experience the depth of our humanity and live into the fullness of life that Christ has promised us. There are seasons of preparation. These seasons create space for growth. They open us to the possibility of new life. And then we have the seasons of practice that empower us to live into that new life, to embody the radical new reality of Christ alive in the world. While preparation tills the soil and plants the seed, practice is the resiliency of the plant that struggles to reach the light. Easter is a season of practice. It's not a one-time event. Easter is the season that's the counterpoint to the preparation of Lent. Together, Easter and Lent provide a spiritual balance. It's the idea that's made manifest in the act of walking a labyrinth. For those of you who don't know, a labyrinth is this circular path that's marked out on the ground. And it kind of looks like a maze, but there aren't any dead ends and there's no choices to make. It's just a one-way path, a single way to go. And you walk this path, you follow it to the center, walking in smaller and smaller circles that coil in on themselves until you reach the center. And in the center, you take a breath, and you let yourself feel what it means to be there, to have made that journey. And then, when you're ready, you reverse the journey, slowly uncoiling and expanding back out to the world. It's a centering practice, a meditative exercise that empties and renews. So while Lent leads us to the grave, Easter brings us back to life. And after spending 40 days journeying through Lent, it's only right that we have 50 days to live into Easter, 50 days to practice resurrection. Because the grave is hard to shake. Darkness is not so easily dispelled. There's really no resurrection switch that we can flip and make everything okay again. It's why during these 50 days, Jesus kept appearing to his disciples over and over again, helping them, helping us understand what it means to live into the radical new reality of resurrection. Living like Easter people takes work and it takes time. Resurrection takes practice. It's not so easy to shake off the shadow of Lent because death leaves scars, both physical as we see on Jesus and emotional as we see in the disciples in our gospel reading this morning. Though we're reading this passage a week after Resurrection Sunday, our passage from the Gospel of John begins on the evening of that first Easter Sunday, only a few hours after they ran to the tomb and saw that it was empty. Only a few hours after they heard Mary's story of meeting Jesus in the garden. It's been a lot for them to take in. I imagine they were still reeling from the events of a few days ago. A betrayal, an arrest, a trial, a judgment, an execution. Everything just happened so fast. And now this, an empty tomb and a story about Jesus walking and talking with Mary in the garden. It's no wonder that we find the disciples in a room behind closed doors, hiding in fear. And I can't blame them. I mean, they just saw the one that they had thought would deliver Israel, their leader, their teacher, their friend. They saw him suffer and die for speaking truth to power. They saw firsthand the power of the state and what the empire does to those who dare to speak out against the powers that be. It's no wonder that they locked themselves away in that room, afraid to let anyone in, afraid to reach out. Their fear is real and understandable. It's understandable and it's relatable. The shadow of the grave still hangs over them. Now for us, it's been a bit longer. It's been a week since we sang hallelujah and declared Christ is risen indeed. It's been a week since we decorated the cross with flowers, and yet somehow it still feels like nothing has really changed. Like the disciples, we struggle to understand what it means to live as Easter people in a world of fear. Now, fear in and of itself is not a bad thing. It's part of who we are, part of our creaturely nature. It's hardwired into our system to help us identify threats and protect ourselves from danger. Fear is part of our survival instinct. The problem comes when fear destroys the very thing it's supposed to protect. When fear takes over our lives, we're shut out from the fullness of life that God has promised us and desires for us. Shut out behind closed doors of our own making. Afraid to let anyone in, afraid to reach out. And we feel the presence of this fear throughout our world, from the societal and institutional level down to our own personal and individual concerns. So it's no surprise that our locked doors come in all shapes and sizes, from large-scale policies of exclusion, discrimination, and destruction, to the excuses we make for our own behavior, our own thinly veiled prejudices, and staunchly held beliefs. We allow fear to lock out the life-giving, peace-bringing breath of Christ. I love this resurrection account because the disciples' response is so relatable. We know what it's like to lock ourselves behind closed doors, away from the world. But just as powerful is the good news that Christ has a way of breaking through our fear. Time and time again, Christ comes bringing peace and reminding us of the hope that we have in God, empowering us to forgive each other and ourselves. Our gospel reading gave us two similar accounts of Jesus appearing to the disciples behind closed doors. And in between these two accounts, we're given the detail that Thomas was not with the disciples when Jesus appeared for the first time. And I find this little detail fascinating. Now, on one hand, his absence might have been a simple narrative convention that sets up the dramatic entrance of Jesus in the next scene. Part of me thinks that there's more going on. Part of me wants to give Thomas a little bit more credit. Probably because I'm a sucker for the underdog. And I think he's gotten a bad rap. While we don't know where Thomas was, we do know where he wasn't. He wasn't with the other disciples hiding behind locked doors. Now, he might have been hiding somewhere else behind another set of locked doors, but maybe, just maybe, he was out looking for Jesus. And let me explain. Judging by his reaction when he hears about Jesus' appearance to the other disciples, we know that Thomas is a man who likes evidence. He wants to see and he wants to touch. So when the others tell him that they saw Jesus, he swears that he will not believe until he sees and until he touches. Thomas wants to see and feel Jesus for himself. So knowing this, knowing how strongly Thomas desires to see and experience Jesus firsthand, makes me wonder if he missed Jesus' first appearance because he was out looking for Jesus. After Mary met Jesus at the tomb that morning, she went back and she told the disciples about everything that she had seen and heard, just like Jesus had told her. So assuming that Thomas was there in the morning to hear her report, it's possible his desire to see and feel Jesus for himself led him to go looking for Jesus in the evening. Just a thought. But even if that's not the case, I still feel that Thomas has gotten a bad rap. The fact that most of us know him as Doubting Thomas is unfortunate, because there's a lot that we can learn from his dogged determination to have a personal encounter with Christ. In the book Reading the Bible Again for the First Time, Marcus Borg advocates for a deeper relational meaning of faith. He argues that in the modern era, faith has become a matter of holding right beliefs. That one's faith is measured by whether one believes things to be factually true. So by this definition, Thomas lacks faith. We interpret his desire to see Jesus for himself as a failure to believe the validity of the disciples' claims. But Borg argues that this understanding of faith puts emphasis in the wrong place. It's not only a distortion, he says, but an enormous distraction to see faith this way. Faithfulness to facts is a distortion and distraction from the much deeper and richer pursuit of faithfulness to relationship. Now, I'm in no way saying that facts are not important. I am married to a scientist, so I know and I respect the value of facts. But when it comes to faith, when it comes to the practicing of resurrection, I believe God is much more interested in the right relationships than in right beliefs. Right relationships with ourselves, with each other, and with God. So Thomas's desire to see Jesus for himself is not so much a lack of faith or failure to believe as it is a profound statement of faith, a powerful desire to know and experience Christ personally. Belief in the Gospel of John is always a verb, never a noun. Believing in Jesus doesn't mean having the right beliefs about Jesus. Believing means to be dynamically engaged in right relationships. And that is an ongoing practice, a dogged pursuit to personally encounter the risen Christ. In 2008, Malcolm Gladwell made waves with his book Outliers, The Story of Success. And in it, Gladwell outlined several traits that made some people more successful than others. And one of his more fascinating and controversial claims is what he called the 10,000-hour rule. Some of you may heard of this. After analyzing the data of elite performers across various fields, Gladwell determined that the primary thing that distinguishes a great performer from a good performer is practice, the amount of practice that one had. Greatness, he argued, took 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So what does this mean for us as Easter people? Called to practice resurrection. Every week we come together on Sunday, the day of resurrection, to remember who we are as Easter people. We come to acknowledge our fears and proclaim the peace that Christ has given us. We gather to practice resurrection. But this work, this practice, cannot only happen on Sunday mornings. According to the 10,000-hour rule, if we only practice resurrection on Sunday mornings, even if you have perfect attendance, it would take almost 200 years to master what it means to be Easter people. But thankfully, resurrection is not restricted to Sunday mornings. The good news is that we're given the opportunity to practice resurrection every day. Like the disciples, like Thomas, resurrection is about experiencing the risen Christ. It's about seeing and sharing our experience with others. And granted, it's not always easy. Practicing resurrection is the spiritual equivalent of physical therapy. Some of you may know a painful process, but with a big payoff. It's the painful process of coming back to life, coming back to ourselves. And just as physical therapy strengthens muscles and loosens joints, practicing resurrection strengthens our faith and loosens our fears. Through the resurrection, Christ empowers us to face the reality of pain and death in our lives and in our world, so that fear no longer has power over us. Because it's then, only then, when fear is in its proper place, are we free to live into the fullness of life that God desires of us. So in this season of Easter, may you know that fullness of life and live in the richness of Christ's peace now and forever. Amen.